Discuss what this all means with Daniel de Kadt from the University of California. Very good morning to you. My stomach is in a knot. I can't imagine what yours must be like as you head off to bed. Rather strange times. Tell us what's happening there at the moment.
It's a waiting game. We're all waiting to see what happens in Pennsylvania and Nevada and in Arizona. Until those three states, or at least one of those three states, comes through, we're not going to know.
Now, I mean, what has really come out of this is, firstly, everyone underestimated Donald Trump and his success, regardless of how this ends. I mean, this has really shown the polarization of the country, exacerbated under Donald Trump's rule. I mean, how does the country ever come back from that?
That's a great question, and one that I don't have a good answer for. This has been a pattern in the U.S. for the past 20 years, and really in the last 10 years it's taken deep root here. You see it in electoral politics, but you see it everywhere else as well. In the news people consume, in who people spend time with. And it's hard to understand how the United States is going to emerge into a less polarized space at the end of this. We've already had Donald Trump claim the election is his and say that the Democrats are trying to steal it. And you've got to imagine that many Republican supporters are watching that and are believing it.
I mean, Daniel, I was there for Donald Trump's inauguration 4 years ago, and even then people were concerned about what sort of impact he would have on race relations, the undermining of law, and the threat to democracy. And we see that again playing out today.
We do. I think it's probably fair to say that Donald Trump poses an extreme threat to the U.S. democracy at this point. The behavior that he's engaged in just in the last 24 hours is emblematic of that. But the behavior, as you say, goes back at least 4 years and more. He's led multiple charges and attempts to undermine the institutions that keep the U.S. Democracy functioning. And people saw this coming. People imagined that this race was probably going to be reasonably tight, and that the moment the writing was on the wall and Donald Trump felt that he probably wasn't going to win, he was going to use as many extra electoral techniques as he could, be they in the form of lawsuits or trying to encourage people to actively disrupt and dispute counts that are happening in polling stations.
And there's a bigger problem here as well, isn't there? I mean, here's a country with, what's it, 500 million and more people, and yet we have two old white blokes running to be leader of the country. I mean, surely there must be other talent out there. What needs to be done to nurture that sort of talent?
Yeah, you're right, and it was very interesting watching the debates from the U.S., sort of watching these two old men in their 70s, old white men in their 70s, kind of talking at each other, and thinking about whether that was at all reflective of what the U.S. really looks like, and it's not, of course, as you say. I would say that the Democratic field in the primary was extremely diverse on many dimensions. There were a number of very strong young candidates, a number of very strong people of color, a number of very strong women. And the fact that the Democrats chose Joe Biden may reflect more on their deep anxieties about this election and the fear of losing it to Donald Trump and having him be president for another 4 years, and less about their particular preferences as a party. So I would imagine that if he wins, or if he doesn't win, the Democratic Party is going to continue to try and develop its support base in a much more diverse way than we've seen in the past. And I would say that part of what we've seen in this election is that the Republican Party seems to have made a very strong bid for Latino voters, which was seen as somewhat of a blind spot by the Biden campaign. The Sanders campaign in the Democratic primary went very hard after Latino voters and did a great deal of work in building up sort of grassroots organizations and communities as part of their support base. And the Biden campaign seems to have somewhat left those voters behind. And so how that demographic shift and that demographic group, and of course it's not a block, right? It's a complicated group full of multiple different subgroups of people with different interests and different political preferences, but how those people start to enter the electorate is seemingly going to be one of the big stories that comes out of this and moves us forward into the next few electoral cycles.
Yeah, well, let's hope we see change then. As a South African, who would you like to see? I mean, Donald Trump took his focus off Africa. People are talking about the climb, the rise of the strong man in Africa. They're saying that he's partially to blame for that. Who would benefit us?
You know, it's a hard question to answer in the sense that you could approach it from two perspectives. One could be, what are the sort of narrow policy preferences that South Africans have over the way in which the United States engages in foreign policy? And there are some people, I think, who like the fact that Donald Trump has this very laissez-faire approach to foreign policy, and he's an isolationist. He wants to pull the U.S. out of the world. I think the reality is that it is never good for South Africa or for any part of the world, for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa or South Africa specifically, to see someone who is not a Democrat, and I don't mean that in partisan terms, I mean a small d Democrat, someone who deeply and fundamentally believes in the importance of liberal democracy as the leader of what was at least the most important liberal democracy in the world. I don't think there's any reasonable argument one can make that suggests that we should have somebody who is essentially interested in peddling anti-democratic, pro sort of racist, pro anti-immigration politics in the way he has. I don't think that can ever be a good thing for South Africa, whatever policies either of the two candidates seem to choose.
All right, Daniel de Kadt, very good to talk to you. Thank you.